right, we're good. We are here with Mikhail, and we are here talking about cryptocurrencies and economic markets. So, or are we live right now? Or okay, so we're good to go. So let's really dive right in. We're having some technical difficulties yesterday, but we are doing this a bit better setup. So let's get right into it. So thank you again for joining me again.
Awesome. Yeah, I had some technical difficulties as well, so I'm glad we can get back on the call.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody can hear good. Maybe we'll raise this just a little bit. Or no, that's not for that.
Oh, don't worry, I'll do it.
No, that's fine. So I guess I from yesterday we were talking a lot about the benefits and a lot of the new age going on about cryptocurrencies and that the establishment is kind of turning on that. So it's really interesting to see those kind of changes and that kind of acceptance. Something though that came up recently, that there's a breach in a not so mainstream but a less known cryptocurrency, and it was hacked, and apparently it was basically the founders they closed the accounts, and then they walked away. So they really...
Are you talking about the exchange in Canada, or?
No, not in Canada. I think it was somewhere in the United States, I believe. But I mean, it's happened a few times where people have done those kinds of cryptocurrencies that get hacked.
The hacks,
exactly. So I guess what's your take on those kind of things?
Yeah, it's absolutely a barrier to entry, and I think when a lot of people see that, it's just another reason not to be involved in crypto. So I definitely think it's a problem that needs to be solved, and there's hundreds of different exchanges around the world, and pretty much every country has its own exchange, and unfortunately many of them are not regulated, many of them aren't insured, and so there's definitely risk going in.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's essentially the job of each individual. If you're interested in cryptocurrencies, then you do have to realize there is still some risk with potential high reward, but you have to do your due diligence and your research. And I wouldn't put all of my money on one exchange, even if it was really reliable, right? So there's a lot of reputable exchanges, like Coinbase is the largest in the U.S., and they're actually very, very well funded by venture capital from Silicon Valley, and it's actually the most it's the best performing crypto business, and it's the most well funded crypto business, even though it's not actually a cryptocurrency. It's kind of funny, but they're quite reliable. But I still wouldn't put all my money on that exchange, and I think you definitely don't want to learn that lesson the hard way. So I would say anyone entering the space, they should definitely try out 3 or 4 different crypto exchanges. And I wouldn't, I even take the same approach with banks, right? And there's a lot of people who put all their money in one bank, and even if the bank is not going to go out of business tomorrow in the U.S., something can happen, right? Maybe there's a hack, or maybe that bank, there's something with the government shutdown that affects it, or maybe they raise, they raise their fees on a yearly basis. So you want to have some optionality in any case when it comes to finance. So having 3 or 4 bank accounts is not a bad idea. Just like having 3 or 4 crypto exchanges is definitely not a bad idea. I would definitely recommend doing that. So that's still, yeah. So in summary, I think it's still a big problem that needs to be solved, and it's still a big barrier to entry for a lot of people, because there's that risk that's involved. So
yeah, for sure. And it's really funny that we see that people have, like, they do online banking a lot, and that's kind of something
Yeah.
we talk about, that it's safe, and it's quote unquote safe enough that people trust it, and people
Right.
use it, online banking, because it's faster, and then they trust that the online banking you won't get hacked. But it's really funny that we trust our money on the internet. We trust that. But when people talk about legislating or having democratic referendums, or having elections done by online polls and online identification where you can vote online.
Right.
So it's kind of weird that it's like, well, those, it's like, oh no, that can be hacked, but we're willing to trust our money systems in it. So it's like, well, is it hackable, or do we trust it? There's kind of a disconnect, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the whole turkey. It's like the turkey problem, right? I don't know if you've heard of Nassim Taleb, but he's a hedge fund manager, and he's written a few books, really famous books. One is called Black Swan. Another is called Anti-Fragile. And he talks a lot about what we're talking about now, and the economics of risk taking and optionality and kind of hedging your bets. And he describes the turkey problem as you're basically feeding a turkey every day, and the turkey thinks that you're its friend, and you're raising it, you're feeding it, and then on Thanksgiving Day, the turkey has a big change and shift in its reality, and suddenly things aren't so great anymore. And so that's kind of synonymous to the trust that we put in our institutions, because they're just feeding us, giving us so-called stability, and then one day we might wake up like people in Venezuela or people in Greece, and 20% of our savings is wiped out. And so I think, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but these things are happening around the world, and just because we live in a so-called developed country doesn't mean it couldn't happen, and it has. So I think that's kind of one way to look at it, and why we shouldn't be paranoid about these things. It's not a good way to live our lives, but we should manage our risks, and we should diversify, not just in our careers, but also in finance and our friendships. It's just a good philosophy for life, right? Not just to focus on one thing, because if that one thing is gone, then you're kind of screwed. So
yeah, definitely. It's always a different. It's always really interesting to see those kind of phenomenons happen, and even in Canada, it's weird, because we do have, the New Democratic Party did have online voting for its party, and it kind of had a mixed bag effect, and it kind of worked, and some people criticized it and said that it kind of allowed for pretty much anybody to sign up and kind of vote for the least popular candidate, so that it would, or do kind of a disbalance or things like that. And so it's kind of funny that we talk about politics undermining and social media and all of this kind of influencing, and it's kind of a reality. And I guess that's really the pushback on having online elections and having that kind of simplistic way forward to vote, because it makes it so, people react differently when they're on the internet than they are when they're in person. That's really something. When you're on the internet, you have a bit more maybe mob mentality on social media, or because you have more anonymousness. You're not really, you can block people. You can decide what kind of media you filter into yourself.
Right.
So, it's all up to you. Really.
Yeah, it's really tricky because when we established the whole voting process, like we didn't have these multi-billion-dollar companies controlling and seeking our attention, right? So it's that whole philosophical debate of what is free will, and are we really choosing a candidate, or are we really choosing a product because we want to, or is it because of all these different nudges that we're receiving from advertisements and just online? And I think that's a really tricky question, and I think that's why one reason Facebook and Twitter and all these social media sites have gotten so much shit in the past few months is because people are starting to realize this and starting to come out in different ways. And I don't think anybody has a real solution to this yet, because
that's right.
You can't just shut those companies down. So it's certainly an influence, and we don't really have a solution yet. So
it's really, and it's not even a conspiracy anymore, because former executives from Facebook and Twitter have come out and said, oh well, all the talk about mind manipulation and manipulation of how they affect your mind, and how they want you to keep being on social media, so they feed off of psychological things that occur. So it's not a conspiracy when they say, well, no, they had these things in mind when they designed this, because it's so genius and it's advertiser friendly so much that it benefits them so much. Even to go back to the point where even Visa and all the banks and all the credit cards companies, they're willing to make things so convenient with tap technology and online transactions that they're willing to take the risk of like losing off of fraud and all this. The amount of fraud that is caused by just on Visa, it goes into the hundreds of millions, if not more, every year, and they're willing to take all that loss because the return is so great that they're just even willing to take that loss, which is amazing. That human error and inefficiency, is so formidable in our financial institutions.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's if you look at the rest of the world, where you have a lot of billions of people that don't have a bank account, or they're underbanked, or they don't have access to financial institutions. On the other hand, the reason that they remain poor, one of the main reasons that they remain poor, is because they don't have access to credit, and they can't get a loan, and they can't store their money in a safe place. So there's also the opposite argument, where it's not that these banks are bad intrinsically, but it's just that they mismanage money and there's all these issues. But we still need them. We still need financial institutions are a good thing, and we need more financial inclusion. And Bitcoin solves part of that problem, but there's lots of companies in Asia right now that are doing interesting things in payments, which are not directly related to crypto. And one example just that comes to mind is in Indonesia. So I think there's over like 150 or 60 million people there, and over I think half of them or so are under the age of 30. So it's a very young population, but many of them don't have bank accounts for different reasons. I think religion is one of them. It's primarily a Muslim country, and then you have a lot of islands, so the infrastructure is hard to have banks physically, ATMs and banks on all these islands. And there's some other historical and cultural reasons. And of course, most people don't have that much money, so banks don't want them, to set up an account without a minimum. So what happened in Indonesia is that there's companies that have come out and said, okay, well, we'll just create an app, and you can store your money on the app.
Yeah.
And so there's a company called Gojek, which is kind of like an Uber slash Uber Eats, and they do a lot of different things. But you can sign up as like a delivery driver, and then they have their own app, and you can just collect money through there. But then they also integrate with like everything else, so you can go use the money you get using the same app, and you can go to the store and buy groceries, and you don't need a bank account.
Streamless banking payment system.
Yeah, exactly. There's no need for a bank. So I think that's already happening in developing countries, and that's already that's proof, right? That's the use case. You don't even need Bitcoin there, but Bitcoin it's still centralized, right? Because there's one company that's providing that service, but Bitcoin's a slightly different value proposition, but along the same lines, right? Just having access to capital and having a way to store your money is overall a really positive thing, right? So
yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how the world banks and how they react to, how they because before could only they would do credit ratings on state governments and countries' banking systems, and now they can't even look at those. Now we have all the cryptocurrency. So how do you take that into account when they're taking the credit score for certain countries, especially in the developing world? How does that how do they
Good question. Yeah. There's no precedent for it, right? It's really complicated, and that's why there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of in limbo right now, and a lot of regulators are trying to figure this out. And the U.S. is relatively progressive. Like they have been doing a lot to clarify regulations and taxes around crypto, just for the very reason that a lot of our laws were made 200 years ago or 100 years ago, and they just don't apply, right? So even the definition of a security, you have this definition of it, but then there's some cryptocurrencies that can be classified as that. There's others that are not classified as a security. So you have to individually look at each single one and make a call on that. And it requires just a fundamental shift and redefining of a lot of existing laws. So that's going to take some time. And but it's happening, right? It's happening as we speak. So it'll probably take a few years to really define how to deal with these new sorts of currencies online.
Sure, that's kind of the big problem is who's going to be taking that on, or there's not really one person in charge of doing that particularly, so it's kind of interesting that the private sector is kind of taking over that aspect instead of it being the World Bank or international institutions kind of wanting to controlling that kind of market, because right now it's kind of an open field where the internet is still very unregulated, still very open. Anybody can kind of set up their own software, their own websites, their own credit. They can do it themselves, which is incredibly makes for incredibly chaotic situations. I suppose.
And that's what I mean. That's what I like about the internet, right? And I feel like when you have big private companies like Amazon or Facebook or Google or Twitter, like they start to dominate what you see. And you kind of talked about this a few minutes ago, but think about how we used to interact online, like 10 years ago or even 8 years ago. We didn't go straight to Facebook, and we didn't go straight to Google necessarily. Like we were going on certain people's blogs. Like we had our own sites that we would check out. But now everything's so aggregated and consolidated in just a handful of websites, and I think that's dangerous. And it's not really fun. It's just not exciting, right? I like the feeling of going discovering a new blogger and one that's not paid by some advertiser, and just kind of seeing what they've written. So that sort of more decentralized internet that's really focused on like individuals doing their own things rather than just these big corporations. I think that's personally just more interesting for me, but I don't know if that's how things will evolve necessarily. So.
And so, when we see governments kind of taking different kind of positions on this, where do you think do you think the future of cryptocurrency is going to be more in developing countries, as you said, because there's a lack of, so it's going to be there that it's going to be really taking over, or is it going to be in North America and in the more developed countries, or so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's right now there's both sides. There's a lot of people trying to set up different blockchain startups in South America and in Africa and Southeast Asia, like I mentioned. But I think the number one kind of use case and focus on crypto right now is coming from the finance sector. So like you kind of mentioned before, there's JP Morgan, there's the biggest bank in Japan. You have lots of financial institutions coming in and creating their own exchanges and creating their own platforms to buy and sell cryptocurrencies and all these different tools around that. And I think it's going to really just start with finance. It's just really going to start with the tokenization of assets, right? So putting real estate on the blockchain, putting art on the blockchain, all these assets, and that's mostly in the developed world. So I think it's really focused on that because that's where the money is, and that's where people have money and they're willing to build these solutions.
Yeah.
And I think it will eventually, get to the developing world. I mean, there are companies focused on just building payment solutions for like Kenya and different countries in Africa, but I would say it's probably like 80%. Interestingly, it's like 80 to 90% of blockchain startups I've seen are focused on the US and Canada and Australia and Europe and just getting some sort of usable product and usable token so that people with money can actually engage with it. So I do think it's going to be more developed countries and then developing countries after, as it tends to be like with most industries, I think. So.
Well, I mean, I know that Huawei is developing 5G and like satellite and internet connection in Africa a lot, and is spending a lot of infrastructure in developing countries itself because they know that it's a huge market in the future, that is, and that it's a huge untapped market that they're seeing, but and in North America we have the capitalist monopolization game. So we have Google and Apple and PayPal, and those companies are all spending all their money on doing the cryptocurrency and having those kind of Apple Pay or Google Pay, because that's kind of, don't you think that those kind of companies like Google Pay will end up buying up all those cryptocurrencies, or there'll be a conglomeration of that kind of market, or do you think it'll be a bit more open and it won't, Google can't do anything about it? What do you think about that?
I don't really know. I'm not sure. I think there's definitely there's already some consolidation. So there's crypto companies and exchanges that are buying other exchanges and other tools. So there's definitely some acquisitions going on. Coinbase has acquired a few companies too, so that is happening. I don't know if some of these big companies like Google and Facebook are going to acquire companies or just build out their own. I think a lot of them are building out their own blockchain solutions because they can find smart people to join their companies and pay them a lot of money and just do it themselves rather than going out necessarily and acquiring other companies. So I think we'll see a bit of both. It's hard to say right now because a lot of it's still such a new industry. So there's not any. There's some really interesting companies and interesting products in crypto, but it's still pretty early stage. So I wonder if Google and Facebook think that they could just do it faster and better with the resources they have. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So yeah, we'll see. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out.
Sure. And so I guess for my viewers and the people that are watching, why don't you talk a bit about your book that you came out with?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a bit about that. So I wrote this book a few months ago during the time when crypto was starting to crash, and I had this idea that I wanted to write the lessons I learned trading cryptocurrencies and investing in cryptocurrencies, and I was still, really, really passionate and bullish about the whole industry. But then as I saw the price going down, it was really a test of my motivation. But I continued to write the book, and basically what it is, it's split up into three parts. The first part is just for people interested in trading and investing, and how to manage your risk, essentially, and what to avoid, and how to not lose your money on exchanges, and kind of all these things that we've been talking about. The second part is kind of non-trading related. It's like how you can set up a Bitcoin tipping wallet on your blog, or how to basically use cryptocurrencies in your web browser, and all these different tools that are available. And then the third part is kind of longer term, what's on the horizon, and a lot of interviews that I did with different crypto founders. So it's pretty comprehensive. If you know nothing about crypto, I actually do not recommend the book because it requires some knowledge. So I would say if you're totally new to crypto, go out and start doing your research online, watch YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Andreas Antonopoulos is a great speaker and advocate of Bitcoin. So go watch all his videos, and then buy your first Bitcoin. Once you get into it a little bit, then you can check out my book, and I think it'll be helpful when we have our next bull run and run up. Hopefully, in the next few months, we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. And recently, after there have been some backlash on Patreon, Jordan Peterson started accepting Bitcoin, and he's been getting a lot of Bitcoin donations. So it's really funny to see that people are using it, and it's happening all over, and it's becoming more and more mainstream and more trusted. And
he's from Canada, right? Isn't Jordan
from
Peterson?
Toronto, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've watched some of his videos. He's really inspiring and very direct. I like his style. But yeah, it only takes a few people like him.
A lot really popular recently, and it's really interesting to hear his ideas and to kind of see the criticism he has. That have a lot of value to, and a lot of good points that he brings up, and a lot of issues that are not being really addressed, except for him and a few other things, because let's be honest, there are really taboo subjects about identity politics and all things like that he does address, and it's I guess for a lot of people it's really something that they don't talk about, at least in Canada. It's not considered something that people would find comfortably a comfortable topic, but it's something that's important to address. And Jordan Peterson, I think, is really courageous to be vocal about the things he's done, and I think he's the reason he's becoming vocal is because he's really passionate about the ideas he's talking about, and there's some merit to there's a lot of merit to what he's saying.
Why did he stop Patreon? Do you know why?
So because Patreon started banning people that it was it had intellectual philosophical differences with it, and
really?
a lot of people were saying that it was they were targeting conservative platforms and more conservative viewerships, and so Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin both decided to stop their Patreon and to accept cryptocurrencies instead. And it's been a really big blow for Patreon, especially. Their stocks have been not going up, they've been going down slightly, so it's been affecting their kind of their image for sure. But it's just like YouTube as well. That's kind of a thing that you have on a lot of social media. We're talking a lot about in North America, especially with the upcoming presidential election and the upcoming federal Canadian election. The only thing people are talking about is social media, political interference, and political influencing, and how that all fits into the equation, and who's being suppressed and who's being shadow banned, and all these kind of things become a huge topic of discussion, where they have to bring Mark Zuckerberg into a committee here to ask him
how Facebook works.
Very unprepared, enthusiastic questions that they don't really understand the internet. It was really funny to see the people in their 70s trying to understand the Facebook. It was really interesting.
Oh man, that was pretty bad. And even you think that's bad. Like here in Japan, our head of cybersecurity has never used a computer. This just like came out like a few weeks ago. It's like he's never touched a computer. He just has an assistant like use a computer for him. So it's pretty insane when you think about this person that's coming up with very important cybersecurity decisions who's never used technology before. So it's pretty scary, actually. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the future has a lot to unfold and a lot to, show us. So we'll have to stay tuned and see what happens in the next couple of months and the next year to come. It's going to be an extra exciting summer, I think, with everything that's going on.
And I think another, just throwing it out there because I'm a crypto maximalist. When you look at Brexit or you look at any sort of instability or political kind of issues in the U.S. or Canada or wherever, think about what would happen in an economic downturn. What would happen in a period of instability to the financial world? And usually when the price of the dollar goes down, the price of gold goes up, right? Because people are looking to hedge into other assets. And crypto is a great use case for that. I think when Trump was elected, like the price went up really high, for a few days, and he was actually pro Bitcoin for some time. But anyway, so I would even see having Bitcoin or other crypto as even 1% of your portfolio, just 1% of your savings. That's a nice little option to have in case. Shit hits the fan.
Yeah, it's just enough not to worry about if it disappears, but it's enough to keep an eye on it and have an interest in it, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
So diversification is always key in everything. Don't put all your eggs in one basket is the key.
Unless you're Warren Buffett, but yeah.
Sometimes it can work for certain, miracles occur. If you did.
For sure.
So I guess, is there anything else you want to talk about? Is there anything else you'd like to bring up?
No, man. I think we covered a lot, and it was a really good conversation. There's crypto is still evolving. It's still really early, and there's a lot of people who ask me if it's too late to get in or what they should do, and I always say, like, look, it's not too late. If you had gotten into the internet or started working at PayPal or Amazon in the late 90s, it was definitely not too late at the time, right? So things are still very, very early in the space, and still figuring out a lot of issues. But it's an exciting time, and even from a career perspective, just jumping in that industry, having some knowledge, having some certification of understanding what blockchain is, that'll help you, in your job, and they'll help you also. Just to understand what's going on in finance and economics, which is very, very important and affects all of us. So I would encourage everyone to kind of dive in and do their own research. And you can visit my blog. I'm available for a chat about crypto anytime. So really enjoy talking about the topic. So
that's really great. And have you ever taken any economics courses or anything like that before?
Oh, I took international relations as my major in university. So I actually switched from a business major because I didn't want to do all the math. So I took like the basic macro and micro. So
fair enough. I'm in social sciences as well, so I definitely appreciate not having to do math, or I think the only one I have to do is statistics. So that's what you
Exactly.
Cool. So it was really great talking to you. I really appreciate your time that you took for giving me, and I really appreciate everything you've done. So we'll stay tuned, and I'll try and keep up to date with you. And so
cool, man.
We'll see you on the next one. And again, thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
in. And
Thanks, Dominique. Appreciate your time. Yeah, I'm happy to come back on anytime. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Cool.
All right,
Thanks.
take care, man. Peace.
See ya.